Hi there, this is Anna from Anna Aspnes Designs, and today I want to show you how you can elevate your photos and your photo artistry or digital scrapbooking pages using some of the products in the Anna Aspnes Designs range. We're going to be taking a simple, unedited photo from a vacation in Mexico and transforming it into this piece of photo art by using the ArtPlay Summery Bundle. So I'm going to be showing you some of the different ways that these products can be used as overlays to enhance and manipulate your images. The second part of this process will be incorporating this image into a scrapbooking or memory keeping design. I'm going to be working in the latest release of Adobe Photoshop, but you of course can follow along in the version or program of your choosing. All techniques can be performed in both Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. Specifically, I want to show you how you can use digital scrapbooking products as photo overlays. So I will demonstrate a variety of products as photo overlays. I'm going to show you how to modify scrapbooking products for use as photo overlays. We're going to enhance these overlays using common Photoshop tools. There are going to be two ways to include your photo in a scrapbook layout. And then I want to show you how you can edit the brightness and contrast of your layout designs using the ArtPlay palette Papery. The ArtPlay Summery Bundle is comprised of the ArtPlay palette Summery, which is delivered in 3 different folders. Within those folders, you get a brush set, which includes the PNG and the ABR images. You also get the elements, which are dimensional. Some of them have the cast shadows included. Others are individual PNG format to which you can apply your own drop shadows. And then of course we have the Papery, which includes both artsy digital paper designs as well as solid papers, which can be then combined with the transfers and overlays, which are also included in PNG format, and they are in 2 different folders to accommodate those digital designs. We also have the coordinating artsy transfers. And artsy transfers differ from transfers and overlays in that they are delivered in PSD format. So when I go ahead and I drag one of these images into my Photoshop workspace, you can see that you are able to manipulate all of the different layers that make up that element individually, whereas the transfers and overlays in the ArtPlay palette are delivered in single PNG format only. We'll also be using the multimedia suns, and these are built in the same way as the artsy transfer summary files in that they are delivered in multi-layer PSD format. And that means that again you can go in and you can turn off the visibility of the layers, you can rotate them, recolor them, reposition and resize as preferred. As with all collections, there is a set of wood art, in this case in ABR and PNG formats. So the ABR file can be used with the paintbrush tool, the PNG file can be used as an overlay. And then finally we have the Summery Edge overlays, and these are 12 by 12 inch overlays, but of course can be customized using the tools in Photoshop and Photoshop Elements to accommodate your photo project. So all in all, 5 different products, all bundled together, conveniently coordinated so that you can elevate your photos. And so without further ado, let's get started with our 2-part photo project. In your Photoshop or Elements workspace, you're going to go to File, Open, and you're going to navigate to the photo that you want to use. I'm going to double click on the file to open that into my workspace. And I always like to work on a copy of the image. This prevents you accidentally saving over and unfortunately editing an image in a destructive way. So I'm going to go to Image and go to Duplicate, and we'll go ahead and click OK, and that's going to create a copy of the image. And then I'm going to click on the X mark in the top right hand corner of the photo to close that original photo out. We're now going to start opening the digital files one by one and adding them to our image to enhance the artistry. You can navigate to the files by going to File Open, as we did with the photo, or in Windows, I like to just navigate to the folder and go ahead and directly access some of the files and drag them directly into my Photoshop workspace. I like to begin this process with the Art Play palette transfers, and I know I want to use transfers number 8 and 6, so I'm going to go into Part C of the collection and access the transfers and overlays number 2 folder. And then from here, I'm going to select the transfer 6, hold down the control of the command key, and then click on the transfer 8. And that allows me to be very precise about the transfers that I select. I'm then going to move these into my workspace and drop them into the background. And I like to begin with these single layer transfers because they add a lot of different element properties in terms of texture and color and value to my photo. So it's a great way to start this process. To move the transfers onto your photo, you're going to select that Move tool from the Tools panel, ensure that your Auto Select option is unchecked, and then simply drag that image onto your background. So you can place it like this, and then you can go ahead and play with the different overlays if you want to. So you can keep it on the normal overlay. You can also go ahead and change the size of this. So if I go ahead and resize this image, you can see how I'm able to manipulate it. I can also rotate this if I want to. Lots of different ways that you can manipulate that overlay. And then once you're finished with it, you can go and click on the X mark to close it out. You also have the option to manipulate the opacity. So notice when I bring that opacity slider and move it to the left, then the transfer becomes more transparent. And then similarly, we can do the same with the second transfer. We can go ahead and we can place it over our layout. And if we want to remove parts of it, we can add a mask or simply select the eraser tool. I like to go ahead and use these Photoshop soft round brushes and just go in and remove areas of that transfer. You can, of course, change the blending mode as well. So notice as I start bringing the cursor down that menu, then this affects how the overlay is going to interact with our photo. So we can bring that down like this. We can also change the opacity as we choose as well. So lots of different ways that we can manipulate this particular photo using those Art Play palette transfers. I'm going to close that out, and now we're going to repeat this process with the artsy transfers that coordinate with the Art Play palette. So again, I'm going to navigate back to my Art Play Summery Bundle, and I'm going to select the artsy transfers. And I know I want to use artsy transfers number 2. So when I bring this into my workspace, you'll notice all of the different layers that we have available to us. It's important that you do actually drag this artsy transfers file into the background of your Photoshop or Photoshop Elements workspace, so that all of these individual layers remain intact. If I were to drag this directly onto this photo layer, then all of these layers will condense and we'll end up with a single layer PNG format version of this transfer file. And then I'm going to select the individual layers by clicking on that layer in the layers panel and then simply dragging it over onto our photo, selecting a optimal blending mode. In this case, I quite like vivid light. I love how those yellows and oranges are showing through the sand. Go ahead and just adjust the opacity of that ever so slightly if I want to, and then go back and see what else we have here. We've got some great gold paint, which would look fantastic up in the sky here. Can go ahead and resize that by using the bounding box and transform controls, or you can rotate this slightly. Notice how I'm aligning that texture with the area of the clouds, and then go back one more time, and then this time I'm going to drag in that art stroke, and again I'm aligning that nice curve with those curves in our cloud area, and you can see how I'm just building up the layers to accentuate and add visual interest to our photo. And then once you're finished with the file, again, you can go and close it out. Next up is the introduction of the overlays, but before I do that, I just want to reassess the positioning of the layers in my current design, and I think I want to bring up slightly that first transfer that we added from the ArtPlay palette. So I'm just going to move that up slightly just to add some visual interest to the dark area of these umbrella structures. So now I'm going to return to our ArtPlay Summery Bundle, and this time I want to navigate to my Summery Edge overlays. And these are again 12 by 12 format, and they have a lot of motif, stains, textures in that square format, but we can go ahead and make these fit any format that we are working with, as long as it has linear or vertical, horizontal edges. So I'm going to open that into my workspace, and then with the move tool, drag it over to our canvas. So notice how I can place the corner flush against one of the corners, and I have the choice to resize that to make it fit both corners if I want to. I can then use the eraser tool or a mask to remove this area here, or I can simply use two versions of this overlay where we have one corner flush with the corner, and then we can go ahead and duplicate that layer by dragging it down to the new layer icon in the layers panel. That will be at the top of your panels if you're working in elements, so that's going to intensify that, and then we can shift up the bottom corner. So essentially what we're doing is using the same overlay twice, and then again using either a layer mask or brushes, or for simple edits I just like to use the eraser tool. You can go in and just modify any of those areas and remove them. You can also go in and recolor this particular overlay in order to better suit your image. So I'm going to select that first copy and go to Edit, Fill. You want to make sure you have the Preserve Transparency box checked, and then I'm going to go and access this Contents box and choose the color option. That's going to open up our color picker, and this allows us to sample a color from our layout design, or I can manually choose. And I usually like to kind of go with a mid-gray if I'm going to be applying blending modes, but if I want to add some color, then I'm going to add a bit more of a punchier color. So let's go with this, click OK. You want to make sure you have that Preserve Transparency box checked, because this is going to ensure that you don't flood the image with color. If I go ahead and uncheck that and go OK, you can see it's going to fill the entire layer with color, which is not what we want. So I'm going to undo that and then repeat that same action with that Preserve Transparency box checked, and now you can see that it has just recolored the area of the overlay, and then it's a matter of playing again with the blending modes. And I quite like that screen option. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Maybe reduce the opacity. If you wanted to tweak the color, you could go to Image Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. In Elements, that's Enhance, Adjust Color, Hue and Saturation. And I can remove some of that color. I can also change the hue. So if I wanted more of a yellow, I could go with that approach. I could also change the lightness as well. So lots of different ways you can tweak that color after you have applied it to the overlay. Go ahead and click OK, and then let's go ahead and select that second copy of that overlay and go to Edit Fill. And this time I'm going to go ahead and sample from the yellow, and we are just recoloring that area. And then again, you can apply different blending modes to that overlay. So that linear dodge is kind of cool. Again, you can go in and you can resize any area of this. I could also pull it off the edge if I wanted to. If I wanted to just have this tape area here, I could go ahead and do that. And then this area of the overlay is impinging on that text, so we might want to take that eraser tool. Again, this is all destructive, and I'm not concerned about having a non-destructive approach because this is for me personally. I'm not working for a client. The client's not going to come back to me and ask me to make changes, and if I decide I don't like the result, then it's not a huge great problem for me to bring in a new version of the overlay. And so I find that personally that's an easier approach for me than having a huge number of layers in my layers panel. I now want to add some context to my image by adding some words. So I'm going to navigate to my ArtPlay palette bundle, and then this time go into the Summer Word Art number 2. Now, these files are delivered in two different formats. You have the ABR format, which can be loaded into the brushes panel in Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. And I do have a free basic brushes class on my website at annaaspnesdesigns.com if you want to learn how to use these ABR files quickly and easily. Today, I'm simply going to select the image that I want to use, hold down that Control or Command key, and then select any of the other files that I want to move into my workspace. And then going to drag this over and individually move these images onto my canvas and then move them into position. I can rotate them, I can resize them, I can also recolor them by going to Edit Fill, ensure the Preserve Transparency box is checked, and then select a mid-gray color. Click OK, and then I can change the effect of that by changing the blending modes. So maybe go with color burn, decrease the opacity so that it blends nicely with the other elements in my design, and then repeat that same process with the second title. In this case, I am going to place it diagonally to the other words in my canvas. That gives a nice contrast to the natural horizontal and vertical lines of our layout design. I can resize it, I can rotate it, and then click on the check mark to accept that transformation. Go to Edit Fill, click OK, and then this time I want a lighter approach. So instead of choosing some of the darken blending modes, I'm going to go with some of the options from the lighten category, and I typically enjoy the screen option. And again, make refinements using that opacity slider. To complete the transformation, I'm going to revisit our ArtPlay palette, and this time I'm going to go to the first folder, which includes the dimensional elements. Now, these typically have drop shadow layer styles applied, but you can also add them to your layouts and your images as overlays. And so you'll drag this over onto your working file and then go ahead and perhaps add a color burn blending mode, or maybe go with one of the lighten options. Some of these aren't going to work as well as others. Soft light works well. Pin light is rather nice. You get a really nice pearlized effect of that shell. And then you can go ahead and reduce the opacity as you prefer. You can also change the order of your layers by dragging them up or down the layers panel and moving that image around to find the best fit. And notice how I am moving it over dark areas. It becomes more prominent. When I move it over to lighter areas, it's less so. So find the best approach and the best position and then leave it there. You might want to go back to one of your other layers at this point. I like to turn the layers off and then turn them back on and see how the changes affect the actual complete composite. So I'm actually looking for this overlay here, which I'm unable to find. So if I select that auto select option and click on it, I might have a better go at finding it. And there we go, we found it there. So I actually want to reduce the opacity of that. So notice how that just blends better when I start manipulating the different effects, and maybe take that transfer and drag it up over the cloud area. And if I increase the opacity, you're going to see that that makes the sun area much brighter, which leads me to our final technique. And to do this, you're going to select that last layer in your layers panel and then navigate to the papery folder. And I'm going to use this third artsy paper. I really like the gold in the middle of the paper here. I like the tan hues in the background design, and I also like the texture in the paint here. So if I bring that into my workspace and then again drag it down, and it's important again that you have your cursor at the very last layer of the layer stack in the layers panel, so that when you introduce this layer, then it's going to be deposited right at the top of the layer stack. And then I like to go down and play with the different blending modes. And notice how this can brighten and increase the colors of your layout design. I really like that darker color. I ended up, in this case, I believe, going with overlay. So notice how that really kicks up those yellows and blues. And then again, you can refine this by bringing down the opacity slider to find the best fit for your image. And again, if you turn off that visibility slider, you can see the effect and perhaps make further adjustments. Once you have your image complete, then you can go to File, Save As, and you want to save this as a PSD file. The reason being is that it might be that later I come along and decide that I want to make changes to this. I might want to change the brightness. I might want to move the position of the shell. There's all sorts of changes that I might want to make to this composition. And so if I have the PSD file saved, then I can close it and open it as many times as I like and make those different edits. You're also going to want to save this as a JPEG file. And what this does is it creates a JPEG version or a flattened version of your file that you can use to incorporate into a new memory keeping or photo artistry design, which is exactly what we're going to be doing next. So I'm going to close all these files out, go to File, New, establish a new canvas for our layout. I like to work in 12 by 12 format. The important part is that you have a resolution of 300 pixels per inch, and this just ensures good print quality when you actually take these images and start printing them as individual prints or photo book projects. So my first goal is to create a layout foundation, and this gives me a starting point for my design. I typically like to use the paperies from the Art Play palette, and I specifically like the artsy papers because the design work has already been done for me. You do of course have the option to take one of the solid papers and then place a variety of transfers on those artsy papers to create your own custom designs. So this gives you greater flexibility, but also takes a little bit more time. So I'm going to select artsy paper number 3, and I'm going to actually drag this directly onto my canvas. Previously, we have dragged all of our files into the background and then manually moved them. But because I know that this paper is a 12 by 12 paper, it's going to fit flush to the edges of my canvas and give us a really nice foundation. My next step is to select a transfer. I actually want to blend a photo into the background, and I'm going to use our photo edit, or the elevated photo that we have just been working on. So now I'm going to navigate to my artsy transfers, and I know I want to use transfer number 5. So I am going to look for that, and it appears that it is in folder C. So let me go and select folder C, and I'm going to drag this image into my workspace and drag it directly onto my canvas. And I also know that I want my photo to be blended on this left hand side. So this means that I am going to have to flip our transfer on a horizontal axis. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and then go Flip Horizontal. And then notice now how I can place that transfer flush against the top left-hand corner of our layout design. I'm now going to access the copy of the photo that we were working on earlier. So here is my master photo number 2. I'm going to bring that into my workspace and again directly drag it onto the canvas and go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. Now before you do that, you want to make sure that the photo is directly above the transfer layer in the Layers panel. And you want to make sure that you have the photo layer selected. So essentially this transfer layer is going to be your mask layer, and then the photo is going to, via the clipping process, conform to the shape of that underlying layer. You go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. This is my way of doing this. You can also use the shortcut keys, which is Alt, Control plus G if you're on a PC, or Option Command plus G if you're working on a Mac. And notice now how that image instantly blends into the transfer. I'm going to resize it so it fits much better. And then you can select the transfer layer. You don't want to have the photo layer selected for this approach. You want to have the mask layer selected, and then you're now going to play with the different blending modes and find the effect that you like the most. In this case, I actually went with exclusion. And if you don't like what you're seeing on the screen in conjunction with the clipping effect, you can then go to Image Adjustment Levels. In Photoshop Elements, that's Enhance Adjust Lighting Levels. And you can actually start moving the shadow levers and the highlight levers and even the midtones to find the best fit for your photo. So notice now how I'm really able to make quite a fun effect simply through the use of clipping that photo to a transfer, adding a blending mode, and then modifying that photo layer. I could also go to Image Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. Again, in Photoshop Elements, that's Enhance, Adjust Color, Hue and Saturation, and I can tweak the color of that image ever so slightly as well. It would be kind of nice to have the blues coordinate with the blue in our paper design. So already we're building up the layers quite nicely with just this very small effect. I now want to introduce a couple of elements into the mix. So let's go back to our first folder, access the elements folder, and I want to use this frame layer. I'm going to go with the horizontal layer, and I want to bring this into my background because it's a layered file. You'll notice there's a frame layer, a photo mask layer, and a drop shadow layer. And these are delivered this way to allow you with maximum customization. So I'm going to just drag all those layers onto my canvas. I want to place my image slightly off center and close out the original. So by having these different layers, I can change the blending mode of the shadow, for example. I could even go to edit fill. With that preserve transparency box checked, I can then go and change the color of that shadow if I wanted to. If I wanted it to perhaps be a brown color, then that would alter the look of that as well. And then I would go and access the image that we were working with earlier. So let's reintroduce that master photo image and then drag it directly above the mask layer. I'm going to resize it so that it fits within the bounds of the frame. You want it to overlap just slightly so that it completely covers that underlying photo mask, and then repeat that clipping mask function. So now we have a nice focal point, which is supported by this interesting repetition or duplicate copy of the image in the background with all of the fun effects. And then I want to go and embellish the photos and provide support through both motif and context with words. So let's go back to our art play palette. And now I want to introduce some elements. So let's bring in this tape element and this flower element. I'm going to drag these directly onto our canvas. So notice I'm bringing in multiple elements, and I'm going to click on the check mark at the top of my screen. Incidentally, in Elements, that's going to be on your bounding box in your version of this program. And then you're going to click on that check mark, and every time you click on that check mark, it's going to introduce a new layer. So we can perhaps add some tape to adhere this framed image to our design. I'm going to go to Layer, Layer Style, Drop Shadow. And for very flat elements, you want to have much smaller drop shadows than if you had more dimensional versions. So this shadow here is entirely too much. I like to have an opacity of between 30 and 40. I like to have my blend mode on color burn. Typically I like to have a gray or even a brown for the color, and then I will adjust the distance and the size according to the element. So in this case, it's a very flat element, so we need a very little shadow. So I'm going to enter values using my keyboard of 1 pixel, and maybe even bring that opacity down just so that we get a more realistic look. The flower, on the other hand, and I'd like to have that on top, because you always want your more dimensional elements to be on top of the less dimensional ones, we can go with a much larger drop shadow layer style. So I'm going to repeat the same action, and instead of having 1, we can increase the distance, we can increase the size, and then also increase the opacity slightly. So notice now how that gives that a more realistic look. So these are the elements that require you to add dimension. You can also resize them, of course, as well. There are elements in these art play palettes that are included in their own folders, and I have delivered these in multiple formats. So if you're working in Photoshop or Elements, you're going to want to use the PSD format, but there are scrapbookers and photo artists that are using other programs, and so I like to provide variety, and so I include a PNG file that includes both the element and the shadow, and then those files layered independently so that they have the same control in using those pieces. I'm going to bring this in, and so you can see we have the 2 elements, the shadow and the actual element itself, all lined up. So I'll select both those layers by holding down that Shift button on your keyboard and then drag them into position, and you can see how easy that is. And then this allows me to go in and I can change the fill or the opacity depending on my background layers. So the lighter the background, the lighter you're going to want to have the shadow. If you have a really dark background, you're going to want to increase the darkness in order to be able to see that shadow. So it's super helpful to be able to have this approach. You can also too change the color. So if I wanted to go back and use that brown, maybe even a more reddish brown, and click OK, you can see how that just naturalizes the overall look of the piece. I'm going to close that out, and then so we've got this adhered to the bottom. We've got a nice focal point. It's supported with some great surrounding artistry. I'm going to add another element in the top here. This is going to create a nice visual triangle. It's also going to lead the eye over to this side of the canvas. So let's now go and take a look at the multimedia sans, and I'm going to bring in this number 2 file, drag that into our workspace. I want to make sure that I drag it off my canvas because I want to have the access to all of the layers in the element, and I like to make sure that I have my cursor at the top of the layer stack, or a selected layer at the top of the layer stack, so that when I introduce these layers, they're going to be deposited directly on top. So notice now how that brings the eye from the left hand side to the right hand side. It sort of connects the photo with the edge of the canvas, because we've got a lot of visual interest in this side but a lot of white space on the other side. We can resize this slightly if we want to. We can also go in and start playing around and seeing if we want to maybe remove some of these layers. So for example, I might want to remove this layer. I might want to reorder the layer by dragging it down to the layers panel. I can also customize the layer by selecting the eraser tool and going in and just modifying. And you can go ahead and kind of nudge it across using those arrow keys on your keyboard if you want to. It's another way that you can move these elements around, and I really like how that currently looks. So that's the embellishment piece of the design. Now I want to go in and add context with a title. So I'm going to select that last layer and go to my word art, and then this time let's bring in perhaps this one here. I think we used this one already, so we can use it again though. Let's bring this one in, drag it in, place it over the area. I'm going to add a little bit of visual interest by rotating it. Incidentally, you could go and get the frame layers and you could perhaps rotate that slightly too, and that's going to give it more of an organic feel. Notice how that just kind of shifts the overall perspective. And then I like to fill my titles with the color gray, usually a mid gray, with that preserve transparency box checked, and then you can go in and you can play with the different blending modes. So depending what color you've chosen and the colors behind the title, it really will determine the overall effect. I find color burn looks quite good. And if you decide you want it darker, you just go up to image adjustment levels and you increase that shadow lever, and that's going to make it much darker. I kind of like the red in there. You can also do the reverse by boosting the highlights, and that's going to make it much lighter. So notice as I move this title around that the areas, the darker areas beneath, actually make the title more visible than the lighter areas. If I create a new layer and I access my text tool and I click down, drag and release, that's going to create a text box, which is then going to constrain my text as I type. And then I can add in the story that goes with this particular layout design. I can resize it. I can also select all of the text by reselecting that text tool, and I can use the tools at the top of my screen to select different fonts. I can change the type of font. I can have the different size of characters. I can also change the alignment of my text from left to right or even center as I choose. So I typically like to go with more of a readable font so that way the viewer of my pages can easily see and read what I have written. So this completes this little session on showing you how to use Anna Aspnes designs as overlays, specifically the ArtPlay Summery Bundle, which is currently on sale if you click the button beneath this video. I hope that you have enjoyed the session, and if you have any questions at all about the techniques demonstrated, then please don't hesitate to contact me at anna@annaaspnesdesigns.com. Thanks for being here, for learning this artistry, and I hope to catch you in this space again very soon. Take care.